Today is the 16th day of Tammuz and the 5th of July. And we are up to the fourth reading of Pinchas. And it's a very eventful reading. And there's a certain connection between the two parts of it. The first part is the resolution of the question that the daughter raised. Their father had no boys, had no sons. And so his inheritance would not pass through them, meaning the land that he would return them. And so it would be lost, this inheritance. And so they wanted that resolved, and the resolution was that in effect they would marry. They would be forced in this generation to marry people from the same tribe, men from the same tribe as their father, and then they would be able to inherit, just in that generation, the inheritance, the plot of land that their father would have received. Their father, Tzlofchad, this was actually hidden and then revealed by Rabbi Akiva. He was the person who was gathering wood on the Shabbat, and that he was put to death because of that. This happened right after the sin of the spies that we read in Parashat Shelach. So there's an interesting thing here that Moses did not know what to do with this. And God had to reveal to him what the answer to this conundrum was. So here we have this question of inheritance. The second part of the reading today is about Moses coming to God, and in a reversal, complete reversal of their relationship, he demands of God. He's never done this before, and we'll see this in a second. He demands of God that he appoint a person over the congregation, because he himself has just been told that he is about to pass away. So he's 119 years old at this stage, and God says to him, and we'll just read these verses. God said to Moses, "Go up to Mount Nebo, this mountain of the passes, and look at the land that I have given to the Israelites, and when you have seen it, you too will die and be gathered to your people, just as Aaron your brother was gathered. You won't enter the land, because like Aaron, you disobeyed my command in the desert of Tzin when the congregation quarreled, and you were supposed to sanctify me through the water in their presence. But the water became the water of contention at Kadesh in the desert of Tzin." And then we get this reversal, this verse that sounds exactly like dozens of other verses in the Torah, but is actually the reverse of those verses. Usually it says, "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor." Havaya, God spoke to Moses saying. And here it says, "Vayidaber Moshe el Havaya lemor." That Moses spoke to God saying. What did he ask him? He said like this: "Let God, the God who knows that the spirits of all flesh, who knows that everybody has different dispositions, appoint a man over the congregation, a leader who will go forth before them and come back before them, who will lead them out and bring them in. The congregation of God shall not be like a flock without a shepherd." What did Moses actually say here? He said, really, what he's saying is, I can't die. That's really what he's saying. Why can't I die? Because there is nobody like me. He's not saying this as a sense of conceit, of egocentricity. He's saying it out of real concern. He's saying there's no one like me. There's no one who can understand the disposition of all the individuals in the congregation. So he's saying one thing, and he really means something else. He's saying you should appoint a man like this, but he knows full well that there is no one like that. And so God is going to come back. He says, Moses said to God saying, meaning, in other words, there needs to be a response. What are you saying back to me? And what Moses expected was that the response would be, well, there's no one to inherit you. There's no one who's like you. And therefore, what needs to happen? You have to continue to live. So this is another back and forth with God that is very pronounced here. And here, Moses almost learned, like the way we see it, is that he learned from the daughters of Tzlofchad that you can come with demands. Demands about yourself. This he hadn't, in a certain sense, he hadn't seen yet. And he had never been inclined to do something like that. But now he comes and says that. What's God's solution? Very surprising. God doesn't say to him, okay, since there is no one to take your place, you'll just have to continue living forever. He says, no. What should you do? God said to Moses, convince Joshua, the son of Nun. B'kach lecha means take for you, really means you should convince him with words. Because Joshua, as much as he was a devoted disciple, also knew that he didn't have the prowess to be able to understand the disposition of every individual. And you can't lead the Jewish people if you can't do that, by the way. That is a requirement. It has to be a person who is able not just to lead in the sense of getting everyone around him, but getting them to the point, like Moses described here, that they all agree with him. They all follow him out and follow him back in. In every argument that he makes, they follow him, they agree, and they also return. So you have to convince Joshua, the son of Nun, a man of spirit. What does this mean, a man of spirit? Ish asher ruach bo, a man who has spirit, and the sages explain, he is exactly what you asked for. Someone who can understand the disposition of all men. But it's not that simple. What do you need to do? You need to lay your hands upon him. What is this going to do? So actually, by laying his hands upon him, he performs what we call smicha. Laying your hands upon someone is not just a blessing. In this case, Moses is transferring his spirit into Joshua. He's making Joshua like him. Because Joshua has maybe the disposition to be able to be like Moses, but he doesn't have that quality yet of being able to understand every person. He's not there yet. So basically Moses is getting exactly what he wanted, and maybe this is actually what he meant. In other words, God is saying to him, that which you asked for your life to continue. So your life can't continue because there is an end to flesh, and we'll see in a moment where this came from. But there is an end to flesh in this world. And you are giving yourself over in a spiritual form to Joshua by laying your hands on him. And the verb in Hebrew, smicha, the root, the three-letter root, is samech mem chaf. And the gematria of that together is 120. And if you count, you can take the time and count, in this small section, which is from verse 15 until verse 23, the end of verse 23, you can see that there are exactly 120 words. So Moses is giving himself over into Joshua. He's making himself continue within Joshua. This wasn't the only time that this happened. In a few weeks, we will commemorate the 9th of Av. Apart from being the day on which the temple was destroyed twice, this is also the day on which the seer of Lublin passed away. And there's a tremendous story behind that. And I really recommend, if you can get, I don't know if it's ever been translated into English, but I believe it has. There's a book called Gog uMagog, which you should know from Isaiah. The final war is the war of Gog uMagog. So it's called Gog uMagog. It's by Martin Buber. And it's about the life of the seer of Lublin. And he paints a pretty close to accurate picture of what his final days were like. He was found suddenly lifeless on the 9th of Av. We don't know exactly what happened. Martin Buber uses a little bit of a literary license, and paints the picture, but it's pretty accurate as far as what we know. The seer of Lublin did something, was part of something that was amazing. His Rebbe was Elimelech of Lizhensk, and Elimelech of Lizhensk brought Chassidus to Poland. Before he passed away, actually a year before he passed away, he called upon his 4 closest disciples, amongst them the seer of Lublin, and he gave them his abilities. He was in a room, and he basically put his hands on them, and he said to the seer of he was then called Yaakov Yitzchak of Lublin, I'm giving my eyes. And he gave him his eyes, so he could see spiritually. To Menachem Mendel of Rimanov, he said, I am giving my heart. And he gave him his heart. To the Maggid of Koznitz, he said, I'm giving my mouth. And he gave him his mouth. His power of prayer. He was great in prayer. And the 4th one right now I don't remember. And he did something which is totally unheard of, but the sign of a true leader. What does it mean? That the true leader doesn't just ask God and says, when he says, I want to live on, he doesn't mean it in the sense that I need to live on. I am what I am, and you'll do with me what you'll do. But the leadership needs to continue. And so basically he does this act of smicha, of giving himself over to the next generation. And there is so much responsibility and far-sightedness in doing this act and making sure, like Moses did, that the people do not remain like a flock that does not have a shepherd. And when this is not done, we see that every generation in which this is not done, that there is a great leader, and he doesn't appoint those who should come after him, then the results usually are calamitous. The results usually are very gruesome. They're not very good. But the ones who have far vision and they see ahead of time, the Elimelech of Lizhensk did this about a year before he passed away. He didn't know exactly when he would pass away, but he was old enough, and he said, I can't leave the flock of God without a leader. And this is called smicha. This is what we actually call ordination today. But the ordination today that we have is not the real ordination. Because somewhere after the destruction of the Second Temple, sometime in the 3rd century, ordination, smicha, was canceled because there was no direct connection. There was no one who was already ordained in this way who was able to transfer it on to the coming generation. So what we call today ordination to be a rabbi is nothing like what it was until that time. This will bring us, and we'll talk more about it during the next 3 weeks, because tomorrow is the 17th of Tammuz, the fast day that opens the 3 weeks, and I'll try to dedicate a little bit of time each day to discuss something about these 3 weeks. This brings us into the topic of how can the ordination be renewed? How can that actually be started again? Because really, in a sense, the true ordination, the true simicha, is it's supposed to be an unbroken chain all the way back to Moses ordaining or laying his hands here on Joshua.